This episode is brought to you in partnership with the Colorado chapter of the Nature Conservancy and TNC chapters throughout the western United States. Guided by science and grounded by decades of collaborative partnerships, the Nature Conservancy has a long-standing legacy of achieving lasting results to create a world where nature and people thrive. During the last week of every month throughout 2025, Mountain Prairie will be delving into conversations with a wide range of the Nature Conservancy's leaders, partners, collaborators, and stakeholders, highlighting the myriad of conservation challenges, opportunities, and solutions here in the American West and beyond. To learn more about the Nature Conservancy's impactful work in the West and around the world, visit www.nature.org. This is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast. I'm Ed Robertson. My guest today is Sean Claffey. Sean is the Southwest Montana Sagebrush Conservation Coordinator, a role that places him at the center of one of the West's most overlooked but critically important ecosystems, the sagebrush steppe. Based in Dillon, Montana, Sean works across public and private lands to protect and restore this sprawling foundational landscape that serves as habitat for countless species, supports rural economies, and connects the region's valleys and mountain ranges. Through his leadership in the Southwest Montana Sagebrush Partnership, a collaborative effort uniting agencies, landowners, and nonprofits, Sean helps to ensure that this land in between doesn't fall through the cracks. In this conversation, Sean and I dig into the complex threats facing sagebrush country, from invasive grasses and wildfire to conifer encroachment and land conversion. We talk about how fire suppression and ecological shifts have allowed evergreens like Douglas fir and juniper to overtake sagebrush, and how Sean's team is using a mix of prescribed burns, manual thinning, and innovative partnerships with local mills to restore balance to the landscape. He also shares how they're engaging young people in hands-on restoration work, creating pathways for rural youth to connect with the land and gain meaningful employment. Sean brings a unique blend of scientific insight, community-mindedness, and boots-on-the-ground experience to this work, and he's quick to credit the collaborative culture of Southwest Montana for making so much progress possible. From low-tech wet meadow restoration to building a more resilient restoration economy, this is a hopeful, grounded conversation about how conservation can succeed when it centers around people, place, and purpose. If you're a new listener and want to go deeper on some of the subjects we discuss in this episode, I'd encourage you to go back and listen to my earlier episode with Matt Cahill, who gives an excellent crash course on the Sagebrush Sea, and the episode with Austin Rimple and Nancy Smith, who dig deep into riparian restoration in Montana. But for this episode, be sure to check out the webpage and episode notes for some excellent videos about Sean's work and links to everything we discuss. Thanks so much for listening. Hope you enjoy. All right, Sean, I am very, very excited to be chatting with you. We were talking about my love of Dillon, Montana, where you are based, and how the Beaverhead River has basically skunked me over and over and over with my amateur fishing. But we're not here to talk about fishing. We're here to talk about all the amazing work you're doing with the Sagebrush Sea. And we were talking before we started recording that I did a podcast a while back with Matt Cahill, and we went really, really deep into all aspects of the Sagebrush Sea. So I'll have links to that episode if people want more background. But could you just start out by kind of giving us an overview, high-level overview of the Sagebrush Sea, kind of what it is, where it is, and why it's so important for ecosystems in the West?
Yeah, I'll do the best I can, and I definitely encourage folks to go back and listen to that conversation with Matt Cahill. And I'd say too, don't feel too bad about the Beaverhead humbling you. It's a unique, kind of tough fishery. I'm humbled by it myself, and I've been living here for 10 years. So
okay, good.
Yeah, but yeah, the Sagebrush Sea, the land in between, I like to call it, kind of that forgotten place. And I went to school in Wyoming, and I used to drive around that state, and I didn't give much thought to it. Like, it's just empty wasteland. What's that stuff good for? Moving down to Dillon. I actually moved to Dillon, took a job with the BLM originally as a hydrologist, and what a great experience. Unique. I mean, not having much for a range background or, working in the sagebrush steppe and then getting to work real closely with such talented folks within the BLM, range specialists going out, doing land health assessments, learned a ton really fast doing that. And now, of course, I'm fully immersed in the ecosystem and doing what I can to help it out. So, yeah, going back to that land in between, the other thing in Southwest Montana, it's really that connective tissue between our mountain ranges and our valley bottoms. It's from Dillon, you've been here, you can see, I think they say 9 different mountain ranges from town.
Yeah.
What really makes us unique is all these really broad intermountain valleys and, great fisheries, streams in the bottoms, but everything between is our sagebrush steppe. And so, one thing I test out on folks is if you think about it from a water perspective, every drop of water or snow that falls in our region at some point, flows through the sagebrush steppe, whether that's lands in it or, lands in the mountains and through snowmelt runs through the sagebrush to get to our main stem rivers and streams. But when we say sagebrush, that's the other thing we want to talk about too, is it's what our grasslands are in Southwest Montana and the Great Basin, in the Western United States. The sagebrush steppe is the largest ecosystem in the lower 48 or in North America. But yeah, it's our forage base for wildlife and for livestock, and numerous species rely on it. And, not just for wildlife, but economics of our rural communities. So it's really the foundational piece of life in the West for many years.
And we're going to dig into some of the details about the different threats to it and why it is, requires so much protecting. But can you kind of give an overview of some of the main pressures that have started kind of pushing on this ecosystem and why it's become such a important initiative for both TNC, but then so many of the other organizations in Southwest Montana that y'all have teamed up with?
Yeah, I think the threats are numerous. And, like I said in the very beginning, the land kind of in between, not really thought about. So it really, I think, took the potential listing of the greater sage grouse to get everyone's attention. And I think we now know we've already lost 50% of what we had from, in sagebrush steppe in the Western United States. 50% is already gone. And, in 2022, some new analysis in Science came out, that shows that we're still losing 1.3 million acres a year.
That's crazy. And what are the main, development, I guess, is a big one, obviously, but what else?
Yeah, right away you think development's got to be number one, but actually it's conversion to invasive annual grasses and conifer expansion. That's coupled with wildfire. Yeah, so invasive annual grasses, primarily cheatgrass here in Southwest Montana. There are others across the West that are posing even greater problems now, like Nana or Medusa head. But so let's say cheatgrass, and then the other one I said conifer expansion. So conifers are your evergreen trees that are beginning to, not just beginning, have been expanding beyond their historic range into other habitat types, and in this case, into our sagebrush steppe, into our rangelands. Conversion is still up there, but it's those. So you have land use conversion, conversion into ag ground or development and subdivisions, whatever it might be, coming from the bottom, in elevation, and then you have conifer expansion coming from the top. So you got this big squeeze going on this ecosystem from both ends.
Yeah. Well, that's probably a good way to just start talking about the conifer expansion, because that was, as I was preparing for this, it's one of those things that I, when I read about it, I'm like, oh, that makes sense, but I just never really put it together in my brain. Can you just discuss that conifer expansion? I mean, I guess the first question is, why is that happening? Europeans have been here for several hundred years. And at what point did these conifers, why are they able to expand beyond what they had done before, say, Europeans got here?
Yeah, it's kind of a perfect storm of events, and it's hard to really point to one thing, or, perhaps we don't fully understand it. But, we can primarily link it to the exclusion of fire. Our grasslands were prone to more frequent, less intense, fast moving wildfire. And, come the turn of the 19th century and the Forest Service coming about and, coming up with rules that we put all wildfires out, we got really good at putting out wildfires. I think about that same time as well, we, especially here in Dillon, the discovery of gold brought a lot of miners and settlement to our region. And with that came livestock. And really, it wasn't just the livestock, it's unregulated livestock, year-round use, open range, sheep first, and then cattle. I bring that up because with that unregulated use, you had like wholesale removal of fine fuels that would carry fire. So fine fuels that I mean grass. And you also remove that competition for conifer seedlings to take hold in places. So you remove fire, you remove that competition, you really provide that opportunity for these really highly competitive trees to become established beyond their historic range. And it's just continued ever since.
So can you talk a bit about how y'all are approaching that particular problem? I mean, from everything I was reading, I feel like there's kind of four main things you and the Southwest Montana Sagebrush Partnership are doing. And we'll get into the partnership in a second, but could you just talk a bit about how you guys are approaching this conifer, kind of thinning, I guess, or reclaiming the land? Because it seems, from my perspective, it seems like it hits on so many important aspects. It hits on ecological and environmental, but then you've also figured out a way to help it to make it help rural economies at the same time, which I think is really a smart kind of a magic way to go about it, where it is like win-win-win across the board. Can you just discuss that a bit?
Yeah. So, to deal with conifer expansion here in Southwest Montana, the simplest, the most we've done is with what we call, cut and lop or lop and scatter, where we're getting out and actually cutting these trees, getting them below sagebrush height and leaving them there to decompose over time. So we've done a ton of that. There's, ideally, and that's one thing I should bring up, is in Southwest Montana, we're at a relatively high elevation compared to our neighbors to the south in Idaho, Utah, Nevada, and the Great Basin there. So we're higher elevation. That means we get more precip in the form of snow, and we also have cooler temperatures. So it's important to bring up, just in Beaverhead County, where we're at in Dillon, we have 13 different species of sagebrush.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, mind blowing. So, each one of those species has its own niche. And I bring that up because each responds differently to fire. I brought up fire earlier. So you hear fire and sagebrush, typically it's a pretty negative relationship, especially in the Great Basin. And that's where you get this really wicked fire return interval with cheatgrass, that whole relationship where, cheatgrass takes over, you get fire more frequently, and the sagebrush never has a chance to reestablish itself down there. But we're talking more Wyoming big sagebrush, maybe basin big sagebrush. In Southwest Montana, we're mountain big sagebrush, higher elevation stuff, and also three-tip sagebrush. So like three-tip will actually sprout from the stump after fire, which is pretty unique. And then mountain big sagebrush has it has to reseed itself, but we are seeing canopy return of mountain big sagebrush here in as little as 12 years, 15 years to pre-fire. So it responds really well versus like Wyoming big sagebrush may take 100 years, 150 years to get back to where it was before wildfire. So prescribed fire or controlled burning is a big part of our strategy in Southwest Montana. If we cut only out in the sagebrush, you're going to get regeneration. You're going to get seedlings resprouting in 5 to 10 years. And then perhaps 25 to 30 years, you kind of back where you started. Whereas if you can follow with fire, you take care of that seed source, you take care of the seedlings that maybe got missed. And, your lifespan of that work is 50 plus years, let's say. And so fire is a big part of that. And then when I first got into this work, the first thing I heard in our community from folks who didn't quite understand why the heck we were cutting our green live trees, native trees that are alive out in the sagebrush. Why are we cutting them and just leaving them? It's like, why can't we use that stuff? Why can't we use it? So that's the first kind of murmurs of, complaint or misunderstanding of what was going on. And I thought it was a valid question. I mean, I'm not a forester, but I think it's pretty obvious to folks economically, the scattered trees, it's hard you can't just go pick them out one by one out scattered and economically have it make sense. But what we've noticed, like if you're here in Dillon, or if you do this around the West, one of our expansion species is Douglas fir. And so Douglas fir and Rocky Mountain juniper are our two primary species that are expanding into our sagebrush down here, up here. And so say you're out hunting or you're out hiking around, you start walking into the forest and you're in some small Douglas fir on the fringe. Well, you could be 100 yards in, a quarter mile in, and you're still noticing sagebrush skeletons around you. And it's just pretty eye-opening. I had that pointed out to me once, and now, you see it everywhere. So I guess my point is we do have Douglas fir expansion that is now 70, 80 years old, or even older, really. It started 150 years ago. But some of the stuff that's 70, 80 years old, there's an opportunity there, I guess. So if we're going to actually reclaim rangeland that we've lost, we're going to have to start working in these more heavy density, areas of expansion. But with that, what do you do with the material? You can't just leave it on the ground. It's too much. We don't want to just pile it and burn it. There's an opportunity there to harvest it and utilize that material in some way. So I think that's what you were alluding to previously. It's a challenge. We're not the only ones, and it's been an ongoing issue probably forever. Is how do we utilize non-saw material? It's small diameter, it's crooked, it's limby, it's not great for saw logs. So it's going to be a challenge, but we're definitely giving it a go.
Yeah, that's great. And when you were initially, you said there was some, initial discussion, among the public about, well, can't we use that stuff? How did you even go about finding potential mills or people who could use that? Because I saw a great video about it that TNC had put together that I'll embed that on the webpage for this so folks can watch it. But it seems like there are a number of small scale lumber mills or timber mills in the area that have been, it sounds like they've been, it's not like it's their entire business, but it's been enough of a bump that it gives them, some economic stability that may not have been there before you guys started doing this. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah. So, we're just getting started with this. We've completed one kind of demonstration project because it was really hard to find someone to do this, really hard to find folks to try to utilize this material. But really, what I've learned in this process is we have lost, or we are actively losing, the ability to get out and do this type of work. We don't have the smaller niche logging operations, small and paw logging operations that would be interested in doing this work right now. Out in the woods to actually harvest this material. So we're kind of, I think you asked me, like, how did we even get started? Really, it's just about, small town, small community, start talking about it. Start reaching out to folks. And am I crazy? Is this possible? Can we do this?
That area where you live, that whole area, when you look at the map of where you operate down to like Lima and then the Big Hole Valley, it's a wide open, big area, but I would imagine in a lot of ways it's still a pretty tight knit community across that area. Am I right with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I think we talk a lot about, kind of stepping back to the Sagebrush Sea and the Sagebrush steppe. And when you look across the West, there's really not that many places left where you have these expanses of sagebrush that are in good shape, and not only in good shape, but maybe resistant to things like cheatgrass. They're resilient to disturbance. And Southwest Montana is one of those last best places as far as sagebrush steppe goes. It's relatively intact. It's resistant to cheatgrass because of its elevation. It's not immune to it by any means, but somewhat resistant, relatively speaking. And I like to, the more I think about this too, is it's the same thing when you talk about our communities and about the culture here. Is we still have that rural, multi-generational ranch-based community and culture. It's still connected to the landscape, more so than maybe other places.
Yep.
in the West that have changed in the last 20, 40, 50 years. So that's what the Sagebrush Partnership is about. And that's what we're trying to do. And this logging piece you brought up is a component of that, but we're not just trying to conserve and preserve our sagebrush steppe as an ecosystem here in Southwest Montana. I think with that, we're trying to preserve a culture, rural values and in that sense of community that you brought up.
Well, and one of the things I want to talk about in just a second is how you figured out ways to have job opportunities for folks from age, 18 to 25, which I think is really great on about 100 different levels. But before we get into that, can you discuss the Southwest Montana Sagebrush Partnership? Because when I was looking on the website, there was this cool quote I saw, and it said, "It's not a new entity doing new work, but rather a name given to a philosophy and a collaborative spirit that has existed in Southwest Montana for many years." And I formerly used to be in the nonprofit world. I used to work at a conservation organization. And this is my opinion, but a lot of times when people would start up brand new organizations, and it's almost like everything was getting fragmented, and the energy's getting fragmented. And so what I loved about this is that you're consolidating a lot of things that are already going on, putting a name on it, helping it get a little more organized. But it's not like you're starting yet another nonprofit that may be competing with others. This is more of a collaboration among tons of organizations, individuals, government, nonprofit that have been doing this stuff for decades. How did that whole thing come about?
Yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that there. Yeah, the Southwest Montana Sagebrush Partnership, like you said, it's not a standalone nonprofit, 501c3 or anything like that. And kind of the origin story, that philosophy you mentioned, that kind of culture of collaboration that existed here in Southwest Montana, really, crisis kind of drives, necessity, I guess, or necessity, whatever you want to. Necessity drives innovation, mm-hmm. Whatever it might be. And I think that history of collaboration here really got started when the potential listing of the Arctic grayling in the Big Hole River. It came about in mid 2000s-ish. I'm probably going to get that wrong. Early 2000s. It hasn't gone away. It flares up every now and then still. But the collaboration that was needed to conserve water and in-stream flow and change irrigation practices, change fishing, everyone working together, making sacrifices, all the agencies coming together under a common goal. So there was that network or kind of that fabric of collaboration or partnership as a result of that effort, which is incredibly successful. So, 10 or probably 15 years after that had started, the Sagebrush Partnership was given a name, and that was really came about from a Fish and Wildlife Service employee here in town who's now retired. Called a meeting and had everyone in the room. There's 40 plus people showed up, and just basically to share what are folks doing in our rangelands. Are folks working on Conifer expansion? Are we thinking about cheatgrass? This was 2017. I actually wasn't at that meeting because we were just having our second child.
That's a good excuse.
Yeah.
That's an excused absence.
Yep. So I think the outcome of that meeting was, wouldn't it be cool if we could be more coordinated, on what we're doing? Because this landscape is so checkerboarded from a ownership standpoint, BLM, private, state, Forest Service. What if we had a coordinator? What if we had a person who it was their job to try to keep us coordinated in our conservation action across public and private lands? So that was kind of where the idea was kind of born. And then there was an opportunity through a partner, Intermountain West joint venture, who had an agreement with the BLM back in, I think, maybe 2016. And as part of that agreement, one of their things they wanted to try was kind of placing capacity in these places where there was a need and there was already momentum to do more work on the ground, more capacity to conserve rangelands. And I think at first it's like, well, what the heck does that mean?
Yeah.
But what it finally it came around to was like, oh, there's opportunity maybe to fund a position in Dillon to coordinate partnership effort. And really that opportunity is what provided the opportunity to come up with a name. So Jim Berkey with the Nature Conservancy was the lead on writing the proposal for ultimately my position. And he had to give it a name in that proposal. So Southwest Montana Sagebrush Partnership is what we came up with. And so that's the name. And, it's kind of everyone under the sun here in Southwest Montana. So it's a broad umbrella of folks working together, not super organized like other collaboratives or partnerships probably, but getting a ton of work done nonetheless.
Well, when you first started, like you name it, you're put at the head of it. What were your first priorities? Because I would imagine in some ways the work's going, there's all this amazing momentum. Everybody is kind of on the same page and there's a real need for it. But I just see this all through the lens of how I think about things. And then there would, all of a sudden you're in charge. How did you think about, all right, let's get this thing moving forward? What were some of your priorities right at the very beginning?
So right about that same time, we got introduced to some of Bill Zedike's work in this low-tech restoration work. Yeah. So he was doing a lot down in Gunnison, Colorado. The NRCS here in Dillon and the BLM got together. We actually had Bill Zedike up here.
Can you talk about who he is real quick for people who aren't familiar?
Yeah, Bill Zedike, he had a long career with the Forest Service, retired. Wore a number of hats while he was with the Forest Service, but in his retirement, he started developing and rediscovering it, is what he would say. He would not give himself credit for developing any of this stuff or inventing any of this stuff, but kind of rediscovering it and putting it in the limelight again. But using really low tech means, and I guess by that, like hand built structures, letting the water do the work is what he would say, letting the stream energy do the work for you instead of over engineering or trying to guess what a stream should look like and building it that way. A big body of his work was working in gullies, these features out on the landscape that you kind of just figure, well, it is what it is. What do we do about that? And in some cases that might be true, but there's opportunity to stabilize that gullying as before it moves up the drainage, or there's opportunity to slow and spread water back out instead of it getting shipped off the landscape, at a faster rate because of that gully ditching that's happened. So he really, he wrote some books on it literally and started getting out and teaching folks how to implement these relatively simple structures by hand to slow and spread water and stop degradation of wet meadow habitats, where we got into it with them.
And so was that kind of your number one priority or your first real focus is those types? They're called low tech process based restoration. Is that the right?
Yeah. It's kind of getting lumped that way. I kind of split it a little bit. It doesn't matter, but I think I guess, yes, the low tech process based, I like to think more of in perennial systems or those streams that flow year round, where you're trying to mimic what a beaver would do and you're restoring processes that activate floodplains and cause scour and deposition. So it's either this is wet meadow restoration. You're kind of halting degradation. They're kind of erosion features out in ephemeral or intermittent drainages that you're trying to halt that degradation or erosion to preserve a meadow resource or wetland resource.
Another question I had a while back, Nancy Smith and Austin Rimple. I did a podcast with them and we talked a lot about this, but if I'm remembering correctly, this is one of the main things I remember from that conversation is that when you think about the typical kind of classic, say, Western trout stream, is this like looking at it from like drone footage. The stereotypical idea is this perfect ribbon that kind of goes through a valley. But if you go back 400 years ago, that is not at all what it would look like. It would have been more of a kind of a swampy wetland dammed up. It would not just be this perfect stream that flows through. Is that correct? And you're just trying to kind of get back to how it used to be before we came in and wiped out the beavers?
Yeah, I think in some cases, absolutely. And it would have been a pain in the butt to walk through. It's kind of, a messy, multi-threaded, multi-channeled mess with all kinds of diversity of habitat and opportunity for water to really, soak into the ground and spread out. So in some cases, yes, that's what we're trying to restore. And I think you look at a drier site where you had snow melt might be the only water that drainage sees. It doesn't have consistent flow year round. And it might hit a meadow surface, or it would have hit a meadow surface, and it would have spread out over that whole meadow and, soaked into the ground. And then that water would be available later in the season, perhaps. Well, what we've, again, going back to that unregulated livestock grazing at the turn of the 19th century, you had a lot of trailing, cattle and wildlife. Just like us, we build our roads next to the rivers and the valley bottoms where it's easier to travel. So they're walking up the bottom and you get this repeated trailing going on. So what you end up have happen is this artificial concentration of flow. So instead of water spreading out, it's getting concentrated in these trails, or maybe it's a wagon rut or whatever it might be. You still see it on 2-track, like primitive roads we have out there today. Anyway, water gets concentrated into this artificial channel, and that concentration increases that energy, the potential energy for it to carry soil away or cause erosion. And that's where you get that down cutting or incision, process started. And as that channel, is developed, it cuts into that meadow surface, lowers the water table. And so not only are you shipping the water off the landscape faster, it's not slowing down and spread it up. You've actually dropped the water table on these sites, and you have a loss of habitat. You lose that mesic or mesic vegetation, and it converts to upland vegetation. So that's, getting into some of that Z-dike work we were doing. And that's, about 2017, 18, we were doing that here. And there was this desire to do more of it and to do more of it across public and private lands. Because really around here, if you're going to do anything, you're going to butt up against that fence line and you're going to say, wow, we got to keep going. Oh, we got to, can we? How do we figure that out? So really, that was the bulk of the work right away for me. Was jumping into that, which fit my skill set really well because I came from more of an active restoration background in river and streams. So that was really where we took off. But it was in one of our first partnership meetings after I was hired, in Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks biologist. That's our state management agency here. The question was just kind of posed like, okay, what's a high priority project? You can spin your wheels quite a bit trying to plan and prioritize, but the biologist for the state brought up, well, there's this conifer removal project we really ought to do within proximity to, 2 or 3 sage-grouse selects here just outside of town. Can we do that? And I think that meeting was like June 16th. And through various agreements that I knew were in place with other partners within the partnership, I knew where some funding was that could possibly do that work. And the BLM was able to quickly clear that through their regulatory process or their NEPA process. And I think that really opened everyone's eyes because, like I said, I think it was June 16th and that project was done, which was about 800-acre conifer removal project was done 3 weeks later.
What?
It kind of got everyone's attention.
I thought you were going to say like 3 years. Well, you said 3.
No,
I thought you were going to say 3 years.
Yeah, literally like
3 weeks.
The stars aligned and we were able to get a contractor there and get it cut. And I think that really oh man, we can maybe do something with this. Let's take this thing seriously, not just another group sort of thing. We're going to get some work done on the ground. So I think that's been the kind of the magic of the partnership is, action and delivering projects on the ground and helping folks do that is what keeps people at the table.
Yeah. Well, and then there's the whole part of the youth programming and figuring out a way to engage young folks in this work. When did that come into play?
That was literally during COVID. I was writing a grant proposal in my basement. I had just a random email come through my inbox that had a video. You get these all the time. I clicked on it, watched it, and it was of a group over in Idaho doing actually a beaver dam analog project. Part of what we were just talking about. And I noticed in the caption that it was the youth employment program and the kid was from there. He said a resident of Lemhi County, or I can't remember exactly. And I thought, hey, that's that's exactly what I've been kind of talking about or thinking about is why don't we have local kids out here doing a lot of this work in their own backyards? And we were getting, AmeriCorps type crews in doing a lot of this work, which were great programs, not to discredit them at all, but I just kept thinking, man, why don't we have our local community out here doing stuff? What an opportunity. And there's this video I see. And so I actually picked up the phone and called the executive director of that program over at STEM in Idaho and asked if he'd be interested in expanding over the hill into Dillon. And he said, I don't know if he took me seriously, but he said, sure, let's try it. And so I was able to include a little bit of seed money in a grant application to get that started over here. And really the idea is, overall, that was the beginning of the shift in philosophy or shift in objectives, our mission, our goal, whatever you want to call it, of not just getting acres done or, doing work on the ground is how are we going to make this sustainable beyond this thing we call the Sagebrush Partnership or even beyond our careers individually here? How do we continue to embed stewardship into our communities more and just make it more of a way of life to, like I said earlier, our communities are still connected to the landscape, relatively speaking. How do we maintain that? So it's not just conserving the landscape, it's conserving the means in which we manage the landscape to keep it what it is. It's that connection that we want to foster that's going to create durability in our conservation work. And so the youth employment program that we were able to expand into Dillon is one component of, achieving that part of our goal.
And so when you're recruiting young folks for this, like, do they have to have any experience at all in doing any of this, or are they just, they're willing, they want to work hard and then you can figure out a way to teach them how to do what they need to do?
They're hiring 15 to 25 year olds typically. So you're getting young high schoolers who maybe haven't had a job, and that's really, what this is about. I like to remind folks that a workforce is needed in every sector of our society and of our economy. We need folks who can show up to work with a good work ethic and be good employees, and managers and team members and leaders. Conservation work and the work we do just happens to be a tremendous opportunity to put a bunch of people to work. There's a unlimited need out there, and we need people to do it. So it's one component of this mission, but it's a large component. Obviously, that's our nexus with it, through the Nature Conservancy and through the Sagebrush Partnership. So, if you have 15-year-olds show up, maybe haven't had a job, they're crew members, and then hopefully we have some older kids, 19, 20, maybe just out of college, maybe in college as our crew leads, leading the crews.
There's this book, I talk about it way too much on this podcast, but it's called Tribe by Sebastian Junger. I don't know if you've read that, but he's talking about military people in the military and how they go to Afghanistan and see all this awful stuff and have their friends killed. And then they come home and they're out and they're safe, yet they have this deep desire that they want to go back. And Junger's theory is that, as humans, we need purpose and we need community. And that's when we thrive as a species, when we have those two things. And it seems like that is just this real quick introduction starting at age 15 to doing work that matters, that's helping your local community, and you're doing it alongside a bunch of other like-minded people. I mean, it just seems like that. I bet a lot of folks, that's just like that if you look at their life, 50 years from now, that's going to be a highlight of their life, doing that hard work together with a team that is making the world better. I mean, it just seems like can we hire?
Exactly. I joke about quite a bit that I'm part of creating these opportunities that I want to do. I hear you. Yeah, no, you nailed it. I mean, that's what this is. I mean, even the way we describe it, our relationship, our partnership with the youth employment program is we want to give kids purpose. We want to connect them not just to each other, which is something that is, there's technology, there's things that continue to drive us apart or continue to, limit that human connection, but it's also connection to process of, where does their food come from? Where does their energy come from? It's just that connection with natural resource management is going to hopefully provide an opportunity to see them as something much larger than themselves and give them purpose and meaning, see where they fit into this big, mess of a world.
So back to one of the other issues that you guys are working on, the invasive grass, cheatgrass, and you spoke to this a moment ago. And up until recently, I feel like I knew cheatgrass was a real problem, but I didn't fully understand even what it was or why such a problem or how it became such a problem. Could you just give a quick overview about that issue in the West in general?
Cheatgrass is an invasive annual grass, so it actually gets its name from it kind of cheats. It comes up early. It germinates way earlier than everything else. In fact, it will a lot of times germinate in the fall after you get your first wetting event, maybe in September or October. Those seeds will germinate then, and then you'll have these little green leaf grass plants that'll sit under the snow all year long. And as soon as things fly out in the spring, it gets a jump start and starts growing before everything else. So it's cheating. It's robbing those resources from our native species right away. And it just puts out thousands and tens of thousands of seeds per plant. It's highly competitive. It'll occupy any bare ground, it has an opportunity to. So the issue is it's so competitive. It gets ahead so fast. It puts out, it's such a prolific reproducer. It'll completely take over a site over time if it has the opportunity. So that's the threat is, once you have that in place, we don't know if you can eradicate it or restore a site back to native species. I think it's happening in places, but it's really hard.
Sounds like cockroaches. Sounds like a grass version.
Yeah, it probably is. I don't have a lot of experience with those two, but I could see the analogy. Yeah.
That's whenever I'm talking to scientists, they kind of cringe when I start either asking for broad generalizations or giving weird analogies. But.
No, it's a wicked problem, and the cheatgrass, it's everywhere. It's in town. That seed source connects to everything, and it's out there, and it's just waiting for that operate. Like here, it needs disturbance. Like you'll find perfectly intact rangelands, and you find a badger hole with a little pile of disturbance, and there might be a patch of cheatgrass on it. So that's not necessarily what we're concerned about. Yes, it's a seed source. I think what we're concerned about is if a wildfire went through that area, opened up at the wrong time of year, and opened up a bunch of ground for that seed source to occupy, then we're dealing with an issue we may never, be able to get rid of.
This is a specific question, and if you don't know the answer, we can cut it out. But where did it come from? Did it come from Europe? Where did it, or was it here? And just the way things worked before Europeans came, it never spread.
It did come over from Europe, Asia, somewhere over there for sure. It came over on a boat, and I think I've seen, once it got here, it actually spread to where it's at now. Not in quantity or it's not covering as much land now, but it got to everywhere it is in 80 years, less than 100 years.
And so how do you deal with, what are the main kind of techniques you use to deal with it or to try to contain it?
Well, number one, healthy rangelands is your best bet. If you have healthy rangelands, healthy native communities of bunch grasses, sagebrush, forbs, all that, it'll a lot of times stay out of that. But once it's there, some disturbance event happens, or perhaps it's what we see here is a lot of south-facing, less productive slopes where there's a lot of heat loading. There's not a lot of production there anyway. It'll occupy those sites. There's ways you can graze it early. People are doing that places with some success, from what I understand. I haven't been part of anything locally here yet. I think that's pretty challenging, but of course, there's chemical application as well. There's different herbicides out there now that can target that life cycle, or that specific the way that plant regenerates, the way cheatgrass regenerates. So unfortunately, that's one of our best options right now.
Another question about that, when you think about your work with the conifers, do you have to be careful with fire if cheatgrass is in the area? Do those two kind of work against each other in some ways?
We're really paying attention to ecological sites. So what's the potential of that site? If it's a dry, scabby slope that didn't have a lot of bunch grasses or fine fuels, it probably wouldn't have carried fire anyway. So therefore, those trees would naturally be there, right? It would be juniper habitat. Juniper is not fire tolerant. So you typically find Rocky Mountain juniper on tops of ridges or in rocky, scabby soils where you wouldn't have wildfire be able to to get to because there's a lack of fine fuels. So what we, where we're cutting trees, where our partners and where we're applying prescribed fire, we're paying attention to those ecological sites and only putting fire where it's appropriate. And as part of that, it's okay, do we have a cheatgrass problem in a place, and how do we design our project around that? Can we avoid it? Do we want to actually burn over it so we can get the chemical to the ground? It's a very nuanced practice, project by project. So, the other kind of thing with conifer expansion is as these trees expand and they get denser and denser, if or when wildfire does come through a site, now all of a sudden you have a way higher fuel load, and the severity of that fire and the intensity is way higher, and you get more damage to those soils, therefore leaving that site perhaps more susceptible to cheatgrass invasion post-fire versus a fire that would move quickly through sagebrush and grass.
A question about kind of your public land versus private land is, what is there a percentage of your work that is done on public versus private, or does it just kind of vary year to year? And how do you approach landowners with these ideas? I mean, I guess because we spoke about, the small tight knit community, I would guess it's pretty well known what y'all are doing, but I'd love to hear about how you do go about approaching private landowners about this kind of thing.
Just from like a split perspective, it varies year to year, of course, but I think overall we're actually pretty darn close to 50-50, surprisingly, Yeah, I think, conifer expansion, we've cut, 60,000 acres since 2018. And I think about 60% is what I looked at recently is on private land. So we're a little skewed to private there right now. And so to your question on private landowners, it varies quite a bit. And that's the strength of the partnership is, a different entity, the Nature Conservancy or the NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, or the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Partners Program also works on private lands. So the NRCS, the Fish and Wildlife Service, TNC, our local conservation districts may all be entities who have individuals who have relationships with private landowners in certain places. They also have the ability to maybe help implement conservation action on their ground. We also, have a great, highly functional BLM office here in Dillon who has been implementing projects on BLM for years and often can carry that work onto adjacent private lands. And so you kind of have the most powerful way to approach someone, or the most effective way, is if they have a reference. We're not just coming to them out of the blue at this thing they've never heard of or never seen before. Like when it comes to conifer removal, for example, they're seeing it happen. We've done so much. They've seen it on the neighbors. They've seen it on public land. Even now, 7 years into this, we're actually getting many inquiries, cold calls. By we, I mean either myself or other partners like the NRCS or Fish and Wildlife Service, folks asking about, is there any grant funding, or, how do I go about doing this type of work on my own land? So, I think it really, and then that's the same for cheatgrass is one of those issues here that it's everywhere, but it's not as widespread in places. You don't have these huge 10, 20, 100 acre patches of it. And so people are still not sure it's an issue. There's not a whole lot of attention there. So we're very much in the inventory and get ahead of it where we don't have a lot of it right now phase. And that's probably the more difficult one to get folks to take seriously at this point. And, hopefully I think they will, that folks are thinking about it as, once it's a problem and it's affecting their bottom line, it's probably too late, so we're trying to get ahead of it there.
Yeah, it does seem like the kind of thing that it would be, it's not a problem until it is a insurmountable problem. Or, it's not noticeable for the average person until it's gotten away from them.
That's kind of where we're at with this conifer expansion too. Is like some of the first comments I heard from folks was like, yeah, I've noticed it my whole life, fourth generation on this ranch. They've seen these trees, they've seen it change, but they kind of like, oh, what do we do about it? Like I'm not going to go out there with a chainsaw and cut 1,000 acres by myself. What the heck do I do about it? But I hope, we're this heavy lift now, this big input now makes it easier to manage moving forward, and that the regeneration, smaller trees, you can go out there with some loppers and kind of pick away at it, do a little bit every year and stay ahead of it. But yeah, some of these, that's the thing with sagebrush and with the threats, they're pervasive. They're everywhere. It's kind of daunting to think about.
Well, I feel like that's one of the really important roles that nonprofit or government or a partnership can play, is kind of being able to be detached a bit, zoomed out, and be looking ahead 10, 20 years. Because I feel like I used to do a lot of work with farmers and water rights, and worked on this issue there's this big issue with farmland was going to be dried up, but it was like 20 years out in the future. And so many of these multi-generational farmers, I mean, they're year to year working as hard as they can every year. And, their full attention is focused on their operations, and the idea of asking them to figure something out that's going to possibly happen 20 years from now, that's a big ask and really unrealistic when you're in a business that's as challenging as they are. And so I feel like having groups like y'all that can zoom out a bit and identify these things and then communicate it in an appropriate way, that's really a huge value that it's hard to probably measure. But when we look back 50 years from now, I think everybody will be very relieved that somebody saw this coming before it got away from them. Do you agree with that or disagree?
No, I absolutely agree with that. And yeah, it's quite the privilege or honor to play that role. And it's a fun role to play and to try to help. And it's challenging, sometimes paint that picture to show the need, especially. I think it's pretty, most of the time, that's the power of this work. It is a win-win. It's that old saying with sage grouse, what's good for the bird is good for the herd, sort of thing. So we find common ground on a lot of this stuff, or all of it. I think the challenging part is how do we get the larger sector of our population to see the same thing, to understand that they're connected to this whole thing as well. And that's where, the youth employment program comes in. That's where trying to develop a way to utilize conifer expansion, and that's going to develop jobs in the hills. It's also going to develop jobs in the processing side of things, adding value in town. Prescribed fire is a very charismatic management action. How can we get more people involved with that, and understanding why we're doing it? So that's really, I think, man, that's what keeps me going and excited about all this, is how do we make this matter more to the everyday person who may not live on a ranch or maybe just move to Southwest Montana? How do they understand that their decisions that they make on a daily basis may impact everything we value out here, whether it be why they moved here, those rural values, that community, or it's the wide open space they like to recreate in, or the wildlife resource, the fishing resource, whatever it might be. Is how do we let folks know that we're all a part of it? Like really we are. and those daily decisions we make matter. And that's where this connection piece comes from, is every opportunity we have to connect folks to this work. And I don't know, it's a tough one, and I'm still developing this as we go, but like, how do you, and I think that connection's got to be direct. And one of those most direct ways is economically. So that's where this job creation, the idea of a restoration economy, to get more people working on these natural resource issues. Cause man, there's a tremendous amount of work to do. The challenge is figuring out how to get around but how to do it in a way that, has a direct impact on our communities.
Well, it seems like you're doing both. It seems like, you're moving unbelievably quickly, and you're engaging the local community and kind of taking cues from the local community. And it's really inspiring to see. I always, when you think about, TNC is a massive organization, and then obviously the federal government is a massive organization. And I love hearing how nimble and, nuanced you are able to be with all aspects of this, from the actual figuring out where you're going to burn or where you're going to cut trees, to even just, you had this idea that you saw in Idaho and you looked into it and made it happen. It's really inspiring for me, because when you think about the federal government, some of these programs, it just seems from the outside looking in to be this massive machine that is probably doesn't move very nimbly, but everything you're saying is the exact opposite. In the time we have left, I want to hear more about you and how you ended up doing this work, because you grew up in Western Colorado, went to University of Wyoming. Did you always think you were going to be working in conservation outdoors? I mean, was that always kind of a interest or focus of yours?
Yeah, what we've been able to do here, maybe it's unique, maybe it's not. I don't, I work in this one place, and this kind of, there is some connection across the West. I hear about other things going on, but man, there's an incredible amount of good work going on. And our government agencies, our land management, the individuals, the people, like the real people who sit in those offices that live in these communities, are all a part of that good work going on. And folks aren't aware of it. Like people don't know about all this good work that's really happening on the ground, and how it happens, and how much goes into making it happen, and how all these different entities come and provide whatever strength they might have to make it happen. It's just a really cool thing. And I appreciate you having me on and having TNC on over the last, year or so, kind of sharing these stories, because it needs to be done more. And we really need to highlight the good work our government our land management agencies are doing.
Well, yeah. And it is the people, it's these individuals, like the person, this individual that you mentioned near the beginning that had this idea, was thinking about it and they all work for different organizations, but at the end of the day, it's just a lot of individuals who are creative and willing to work hard and willing to collaborate. And it's, I think people can lose track of that, especially when they're just kind of on the outside looking in. I know I do at times. And, I think that's the power of these podcasts, is you really get to know the individuals that are doing the work, because that's all it is at the end of the day, just a bunch of people getting together trying to solve a problem.
To get to your question more about me, is I went to school in Wyoming. I went to school, thinking I was going to get into fisheries. I really liked being on rivers and streams, and I like fishing, and I thought maybe I'd be a fisheries biologist of some kind. And kind of with some encouragement from my dad, and my dad actually worked for the Army Corps of Engineers in Colorado for 15 years as a regulatory specialist. So he was kind of that arm of government that was helping enforce or inform the Clean Water Act. Issuing permits for doing restoration work is kind of the nexus there. So he was starting to talk to me about, hey, there's these guys out there doing river and stream restoration work, and they're doing a really good job. It seems like kind of a cool line of work to get into. So, back then, this was, I graduated in 2007, 2008 from Wyoming, and there wasn't like real curriculum on river and stream restoration, but I got into civil engineering and water resources. Now I'm working in the rangelands. It's pretty funny, but that kind of it gave me the opportunity, a great foundation. I got out of school and I started working for a small river and stream restoration firm, kind of dream come true, out of Bozeman, Montana, where I didn't realize how unique an opportunity it was, but I was involved, both the design and standing on an excavator, helping direct the work in the river and stream, starting to learn construction management and how projects get done on the ground. And, I did that for 5 years. Bozeman's an awesome place. It still is an awesome place, but we recently married, and my wife and I were kind of looking at it and thinking, this place might change pretty fast. Do we want to be here, raise a family here for that, or do we see what else is out there? So we kind of ran a little bit randomly. I looked for jobs in Alaska, found a job with the Forest Service they needed someone to manage river and stream restoration. And I had no idea the federal government was doing that kind of work, or I would ever find anywhere that needed my unique limited skill set at that time. So ended up moving to the Tongass National Forest, living on Prince of Wales Island, and managing stream projects up there for, building log jams and rivers and streams for 3 years, and had our first kid. And that's a great place up there too. You got to really want to be there. And we wanted to, be closer to our grandparents for our kid. And we found an opportunity here in Dillon. Took a job at the BLM down here in Dillon, Montana. And anyhow, so, this role I'm in now is kind of like that perfect blend of private and public sector. I've worked for the BLM, the Forest Service. I've worked in the private sector. I've, done a lot of projects in the past. So no idea where you're going to end up. But it's been a fun ride, I guess, and really enjoying doing what I'm doing now.
Yeah, well, you're talking to a guy who my first job out of school I was a stockbroker, And then I want to be real estate developer. And now I'm a conservation person with a podcast. So it's better than being boring, I guess. So you're at I don't feel like I'm that old, but my hair's turning white and I definitely am old. But, I often, people will ask me questions about, career paths and how did you get where you get? What's your advice? I mean, do you ever have any kind of advice that you give to young folks? Cause you're obviously dealing with a lot of them now, through your work. What's your advice for folks that want to be in natural resources or conservation or really just work that's making the world a better place? Do you have any advice you give to folks?
It's going to sound pretty simple and kind of cliche, but nothing replaces hard work, right? Like I think, and in natural resources, like whether you're in a federal agency or not, I mean, there's opportunity to kind of create your work, create your own work, probably maybe even more so in natural resources because it's still kind of an evolving, I don't even want to call it an industry, but an evolving, the needs we're understanding more as the science changes, as we grow as a population, there's just opportunity to create your own body of work to a degree or find a niche, like you have as well, and if it's something you care about, I think that's something my dad told me, you got to want to, again, this is something that I'm sure a lot of folks hear, but you got to enjoy going to work every day. You do everything you can to enjoy what you're doing. And so I think to do that, you have to live in a way that allows you to do that. So I think one thing I try to share with young people too is, live within your means, right? Don't be, it's kind of outside the scope of this conversation, maybe a little bit, but that's a big part of, doing what you want to do.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I think avoiding debt, if you've got a bunch of debt, you're going to start making choices because of that. And if you can somehow manage to avoid debt, I mean, that's one of the whole reasons I get to do this work is because, I was lucky enough to get a scholarship to grad school. And I often think if I had gone somewhere else and was 150 grand in the hole, leaving that, my entire trajectory would have been different. And, that's something that people don't talk about much, but I appreciate you bringing it up because I think being able to have options and, and also you mentioned working hard. And I think you have to be, for me at least, I have to like what I'm doing in order to be able to work hard enough at it. Like if I hated what I was doing, I wouldn't be able to work hard enough at it. And so I think being able to really, really, really work hard is kind of predicated on being passionate about what you're doing. I mean, there are obviously exceptions and, people need to make a living one way or another, but I think that's both great advice. I appreciate you sharing that. One more question for you. I'm always looking for book recommendations from folks, and it could be about conservation stuff, or it could just be books that, My Side of the Mountain. I read that when I was in like 6th grade and it changed my life. Any books that come to mind that have been important in your journey?
One that comes to mind right away is The River Why.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I got to interview David James Duncan. Yeah. I got to hang out with him. And a few years ago at that Old Salt Festival up in Montana, I spent a day with him, before the thing and then interviewed him on stage. And he is one of a kind. I mean, he's on a different wavelength. What a cool guy. And that book just, embarrassingly, I've never read River Why though.
Man, I haven't read it in probably 10 years, and I know I've read it multiple times. So it's one of those books that I'd like to pick up and read again and see what it means to me now, see what I take away from it now.
Yeah, it's a lot of his nonfiction stuff's really good too. He's on a different wavelength. He told me that when he graduated from high school and he graduated and like the next day went up to an alpine lake in the mountains and stayed there for 7 days and fasted and didn't eat and like cleansed his whole brain and body of everything he had learned in high school and then went out into the world and became a writer. Isn't that crazy?
Yeah. And I think, like I said, I want to read that book again, but I think especially for young folks, I think this kind of a coming of age story. And I don't know, at the time it really spoke to me, and I probably can't even say why, but it did. So it stuck in my brain when you asked me that question. And I think other things I like, I also encourage young people to do now that you bring it up, and maybe it comes into like reading, is develop your spiritual self. So what are those books? What are those subjects? Where can you learn more about developing or providing to your spiritual, this side of yourself? So that's something that's probably not talked about too much. And I think it's incredibly important. And I think you talk about finding meaning and purpose. Everyone, no matter what job you do, I mean, you can find purpose, you can find meaning and satisfaction in it and work hard and do it. But if you don't, you have to know why. Again, that goes to the title of that book a little bit. But, I mean, and I think that spiritual development is what provides that opportunity to see that you fit into something that's bigger than yourself, that there's hope. Like the analogy to the Sagebrush Sea, cheatgrass, conifers, fire, development, it's hopeless. Why are we even doing anything? Well, there is hope. We are making progress. We need to believe and have faith that we can do this thing together. So I think that's just another, no specific book I'll call out, but just don't be afraid to dive into that.
Man, I love it. This was so fun, Sean. I really, really, really appreciate it. I hope I can get up there to Dillon at some point and see everything you're doing in person. And then maybe you could take me out to the Beaverhead and teach me how to catch a fish there. But really, man, this was awesome. I just really, really appreciate it. And thank you for all your hard work. And thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with me.
Well, thank you very much. It's been great. Appreciate it. And I love your podcast.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast. I know your time is valuable, so it means the world that you spend it listening. If you want to support the podcast and help it to continue to spread and grow, there are a few ways you can help. Number one, pass it along to a friend or share it on social media. Word of mouth recommendations are the most powerful way for ideas to spread, so I'd love it if you could share the podcast with a few pals who might enjoy it. Number two, you can go to Apple Podcasts and give it a 5-star review. Good reviews encourage the Apple overlords to suggest the podcast to others. So there's a link in the notes if you'd be so kind as to give it 5 stars. Number three, you can support the podcast financially via Patreon, and there are exclusive benefits for those who do, including a monthly behind-the-scenes newsletter, Mountain and Prairie stickers, live and recorded video chats with podcast guests, and much more. Number four, I've also got 2 emails that I send out. The first is my weekly email called Good News from the American West, which I send out every Wednesday. It's only positive news, something we can all use a little more of these days. And my other email is my bi-monthly book recommendations email. One email every other month with 5, 6, 7, or 8 books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The thousands of people on both of these lists will vouch for me. No spam or other funny business. And number 5, finally, check out my online store for Mountain and Prairie stickers, shirts, and coffee mugs. I've got some really cool designs from Western artists with more on the way, so head to mountainandprairie.com/shop to check it all out. I'd love to connect with you. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn, so look me up on either of those platforms by my name or through the links on my website. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for your support.